talking about the growth, it's more like a recession. So we may put it like that. We don't have any growth for this year, and in April this year, according to IFM, there is a negative growth for this year, and other international organizations have also made the forecasts about negative growth of the world economy this year. But we hope that for the next year, we could have some micro change. So if we put 2020 and 2021 together, there will be some prospect of the world economic growth. This is the first thing of the top of our talk. Second is about uncertainties. First of all, uncertainties brought by the epidemic. We don't know what will be the final status of the epidemic across the world, and currently more than 1% of the world population has been infected. And currently the epidemic is a factor that is living with us. It will not disappear in short time. It will stay with us for the next period to come. And currently, in the emerging markets, the growth of the newly added confirmed cases is much higher than that in the developed countries. However, we still have the capacity to curb the further spread of the epidemic. But still, we see that a lot of uncertainties are brought by the epidemic on the world economy and the financial markets. So all the discussions will also be based on the uncertainties. Because we are facing this difficult market situation, a lot of uncertainties with the economic growth and with the supply chain, so we have to resort to openness and collaboration. Today, in the medical products, agricultural products, we have already carried out cooperation. Without cooperation, we can never forge ahead. And it is also true with the financial market. That is all for my opening. And I would like to set this base for our following discussion. For this plenary session, we have this very important gathering of the guests. We have invited Mr. Zhou Xiaochun. He will be giving his talk through video conference. We have also invited Fang Shanghai. He used to be one of the organizers of this forum. At the same time, we have also invited member of the CPPCC and chairman of the Executive Council of Shanghai Finance Institute, Mr. Tu Guangshao. And Mr. Tu, this Lujiazui Forum has been initiated by you when you were the mayor of Shanghai. And also we have invited Vice President and the Chief Operations Officer of the New Development Bank, Mr. Zhu Xian. In the very beginning, we have expected the President of the New Development Bank. However, he could not come. And we have also invited two famous foreign experts, Catherine McGuinness and Michael Spence. Catherine McGuinness is the chair of Policy and Resources Committee of the City of London Corporation, and Michael Spence is the recipient of the 2001 Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences and Professor of Economics of New York University. Welcome, all of you, to our plenary session. And first of all, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Zhou Xiaochun, Chairman of China Finance Society and former Governor of the PBOC, for the opening speech. So can you hear me right? First of all, I'd like to give the topic. I will try my best to link my speech with the topics. Last year, we set up a committee for the International Finance Center of Shanghai during the Lujiazui Forum of last year. We have a lot of issues related. The recent one is that about 1 month ago, the US has adopted the Responsibility Act of Foreign Investors. And people are wondering what are the future opportunities and challenges for Shanghai, because Shanghai would like to develop as the international financial center. Is also a topic closely connected with collaboration. I still recall that last year, in the negotiations between China and the US, an expert has provided his opinions. And the US has also adopted an act forbidding their pension funds to invest in Chinese companies. And last month, we had this new act. And now we have the existing concept of stocks. And we are wondering about their listing. And we want to know whether the Hong Kong market or the Shanghai market would fill up in. So taking this opportunity, I'd like to talk about this subject. In this concept, Chinese media would like to use the word delisting. In the past, we often talk about the offering, IPO, and delisting. For the 250 Chinese concept stocks, they would like to go through a proactive privatization and get their delisting from the New York Exchange stock and find another place to do their second time offering. For the New York Exchange market, their action still have some specific differences from the delisting. Today, because we have a lot of differences and different opinions to be settled between the US and China, so for those companies from China, they still have a great probability to not entering into the exchange market in New York. Maybe they would consider another place to get themselves listed. And some other companies, they have a different consideration. According to this Accountability Act, if they get themselves delisted, then the foreign investors, especially the US investors and the institutional investors, they will see their interests negatively impacted. This is a big challenge to the US, especially the SEC. The interest and rise of the US investors. And another question is our future actions. Shanghai has wanted for a long time to be a world financial center. Facing the existing opportunities and challenges, could Shanghai develop itself into such a center and take over this role from the US side? Here, there are some positive factors and also some negative. There are some optimistic and also pessimist point of view. From the optimistic point of view, first of all, China is a country with a lot of savings. We have a high ratio of savings. The savings represent more than 40% of the GDP. With this high level of savings, it's easy for us to find capital to invest into the emerging industries and sectors. If we have a good mechanism in place, then it's no big problem. This is a very active element. But in comparison, in US, they have a relatively low saving ratio. So talking about the capital, the Chinese concept stocks don't necessarily depend heavily on the international financing. Second optimistic point of view, in China, some companies have encountered problems. It's also related to the Luckin Coffee event. But in general, China's GDP growth ratio is higher than that of the world average. So from the supply side, we do have a lot of excellent companies. We have to admit that there are some problematic ones, but still we have good companies in China. And for the capital market, it takes time to grow that. China has spent more than 3 decades to come to this far, and our capital market has already achieved a lot of success and also has cultivated its momentum, including the management and supervision capacity and also other infrastructures to support this capital market. There is still a gap between China and the US, but when we look at the demand and also institutional development in China, we have this momentum. Next is about the transparency and corporate governance, including the external audits and their quality. From China's side, we have this willingness and the momentum. We have cracked down the information fraudulence in the market, the falsified information, internal transactions. We have cracked down a lot of law-violating actions. And our consumers are also against all those actions that violate the law. Surely it takes a long time, and also we should travel a long way to finally have a fully healthy system in place, and we have to gradually improve our capacity of audit and supervision. In the past, the currency in China is not flowing very freely. We don't have a huge connection with the outside world. However, in recent years, the free use of RMB is rising. By the end of 2012, IMF has included RMB into the SDR basket. Today, the convertibility of RMB is under control on the basis of anti-terrorism, anti-money laundering. We are at a similar level than the other developed economies. And sixth, starting by 2014, we have the Shanghai Hong Kong Stock Connect and later Shanghai London Stock Connect. On that basis, we could make further progress. Number 7, recently we have noticed that China has published a series of policy measures about opening its financial sector towards the outside world. A lot of the policy measures are connected with the capital market. For example, the market access policies, the business operation scales, and also other regulations and policies about the market. Of course, I could not go through every detail, but I will pick up someone to share with you. After talking about the optimistic point of view, there are also negative ones. First of all, after the event of Luckin Coffee, can you hear me? I think I have a technical problem here because I cannot see the screen. Before Luckin Coffee case, we have also experienced some other cases. Shorting, and also this shows that we still have a long way to go to catch up with the developed economies. For this issue of transparency and the quality of audit, we thought some people think that it's very hard to find a way out once it's linked with the national security. The second negative point of view is about the governance of the corporate. For outsiders, they have difficulty in understanding the corporate governance. We have the G20 and OECD principles for the corporate governance. In the past, for the corporate governance of the SOEs or the state-held enterprises, we have more problems. And in recent years, a group of private enterprises have also entered into a difficult situation with their corporate governance. Some even have faced problems like the bankruptcy and default. So we still have to work harder to improve the corporate governance so that we could be better understood by the outside world and be accepted. And our corporate governance will also be a part of that of the world. And just now we have also touched this topic like the transparency and the external audit. The third point of view, in the past, when China started the reform and opening up, we started with some pilot zones, the pilot programs with the free trade zones, free trade areas, etc. So it seemed that we never have applied it across the whole country. Our final goal is to develop China's economy into a socialist, open economy. And we would like to develop Shanghai into the international financial center, but it seems that we are not fully determined, according to some people. Shanghai develops very well as a financial city, but it had not yet reached that level as an international financial center. Another point of view is that for New York, Hong Kong, London, and Singapore, those international financial centers, they apply the common law, and only common law could support a healthy development of an international financial center. And those people also believe that the civil law system could not support such a center's development. Personally, I cannot agree with those point of views, but still we have a room for discussion. The evolution of systems and policies in China are very rapid. We have included a lot of Chinese characteristics. For example, we started with the pilot programs, and we dedicate some specific policies for those pilot zones. Or we can elaborate a law designated for these pilot zones. And after the publication of the Accountability Act, Shanghai's development into one of the international financial center, whether it can shoulder this responsibility and seize the opportunity to further develop itself. This is a great opportunity and also a challenge that brings a lot of uncertainties. If China is fully determined to pursue further development, then China should make itself more international and have more connections with the outside world and pursue more international collaboration so that Shanghai could become a real international financial center that can bolster more international financial collaboration. This is also a message delivered by our moderator. All those elements would guide us towards the collaboration. So today we have a lot of things to discuss. So this is the topic I would like to start with, and also in accordance with the opening speech of our host, I hope that this could become one of the references for our Lujiazui Forum and also for the future development of Shanghai. Thank you very much for Zhou Xiaochun. Actually, Mr. Zhou has talked about an important issue related with the uncertainties. He has mentioned the listing of 250 concept stocks in the U.S. If the U.S. hold the determination right, then finally the future for these 250 Chinese enterprises would be very difficult. Today we are reforming the market mechanism and also the supervision authorities. We have more transparency. The convertibility of the RMB has also been improved. So we still have a big room for improvement. We are opening our market even wider than before. Against this backdrop, we also face some difficulties. Some people are linking the accountability with the economic security, and China still has to move forward and further with its financial reform. So thank you again, Mr. Zhou, for proposing those important views and opinions. It can help us to better understand and also to further our reflections on Shanghai's development into the future Shanghai International Financial Center. And now let's come to Mr. Fang Xinhai and also Mr. Tu Guangshao. Now the floor is yours, Mr. Tu Guangshao. Good afternoon, everyone. Lujiazui Forum and I myself are closely connected. Initially, the creation of the Lujiazui Forum has received a lot of help. For example, the PBOC, including the then president, Mr. Zhou Xiaochuan, and also the CBRC, CIRC, and the CSRC at the moment, the three committees. We have achieved a consensus among us, and we are determined to create such a forum and to continue with this organization. And nowadays, this Lujiazui Forum has become an important symbol of Shanghai, which would develop into the future international financial center. The Lujiazui Forum comes out of the coordinated efforts of a lot of people. Maybe all of them are not here. Mr. Zhou has proposed a very important angle. The international collaboration in the financial market, especially in the face of the new changes. For China and for Shanghai, the international financial center, how could we face up with this new situation? That is a very good angle. And now I'd like to invite everyone to look at a bigger picture. Especially during this epidemic period, the major economies of the world have their own macroeconomic policies. Here I would like to raise 3 points. First of all, facing this epidemic, macroeconomic policies of the major world economies are of extreme importance. This epidemic, compared to some old traditional internal or external crisis, shows its own features. 1 month ago, with the Jiao Tong University, we have made analysis and we are doing following up researches about the macroeconomic policies of the major world economies. This epidemic of COVID-19 is an event that has caught everyone by surprise. When we look at the 2008 financial crisis, it comes from the internal part. This is an internal crisis. And an earthquake, disasters like that is a one-time external crisis. This epidemic of COVID-19 is an external event that has some internal impact. So there are some interconnections and interactions of internal and external impacts. Today, the COVID-19 has cast a heavy blow to our world economy and the financial market. Facing this epidemic, we have to know that this is a crisis that is spreading from one region to another, from one country to another. Secondly, it has an overall impact to the economy, to the society. No sector can stay immune. And thirdly, it has a very deep impact. And fourth, just after the outbreak, we would expect the ending of this epidemic by summer, just like the SARS. And now we have to change that idea. We have to live longer with this virus, and we may expect the following waves of the epidemic. And this epidemic has cast a heavy blow on the economy and also our daily life. The world economy has come to a stop after the outbreak. So for our policies, especially the macroeconomic policies, have to make its response. To some extent, the market has failed to respond to the shock of the epidemic. So in this case, the macroeconomic policies are of extreme importance. That is the first point I'd like to make. Second point, the efficiency of the macroeconomic policy is also an important issue. Do we have targeted macroeconomic policies, and do we have effective policies? Looking at the macroeconomic policies of the major economies, we have this 1+5. The first thing is to fight against the COVID-19, and then we have 5 following aspects. First of all, the relief to people's daily life. Because the whole world population is under the shock. Second aspect is the small and medium-sized enterprises and also the micro enterprises. We have to give the relief to them. And third is the stability of the financial sector. We have to guarantee the liquidity of the financial sector and also sustain the services of this financial sector. And the fourth aspect is to avoid a crisis. We have to avoid a possible economic collapse or economic crisis following this epidemic. The fifth aspect is to guide the expectations and public opinions. At the same time, we have also to make preparations for the future economic recoveries. Today, the efficiency of the policies to guide the macroeconomic growth is very important. We have to make them well-targeted and well-oriented and make sure that they are working, they have their efficiency. The third point I would like to make, Currently, the macroeconomic policy can help us to cope with the current economic difficulties. However, after publishing so many macroeconomic policies, we have to know that we are making a transformation from a regular macroeconomic policy to an irregular macroeconomic policy. Secondly, those policies are adding up and they are stronger than ever. And third feature is that we are applying those macroeconomic policies out of the box, including its total amount and also the applying details. Today, we have to make further evaluation about its efficiency. This is in progress. But what we can tell until now is that all those policies are working. But still, those policies are gradually working out. We have to keep a close eye on this following up impacts. Whether these policies could continue to sustain the economic growth and the financial stability in the future, we have to follow that. So on the one hand, we could already give a preliminary evaluation, and on the other hand, we have to keep a close eye on the future effect revealed by those policies. We have this extraordinary portfolio of financial policies and other macroeconomic policies. The scale and the amount of the policies are more than ever. Those are unprecedented policies. The pricing tools has passed from the zero interest rate to negative interest rate, and today we are doing this quantitative easing, and we are targeting the enterprises to give them relief and help. We have to look at their following up impact and result. For example, for the global financial market, the pricing of the assets, the leverage ratio, those are the issues that we should pay more attention to in the future. And the stock market in the US, currently, the world economy is so in difficulty. We hope that it could get out of this V model, but it's very hard for it to realize it. But for the US stock market, the performance has already realized an out of V-shape performance. The stock market has become decoupled from the economic fundamentals. This is very evident. Could we explain it with people's expectations? Hardly so. I believe that these V-shaped rebounds of the US stock market performance is due to the monetary policy of the US, because they are flooding the economy with extreme liquidity, and also the structure of the stock market. There's also the decoupling. For example, the Nasdaq indicators growth is growing faster than the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones. And for the Nasdaq 100 is growing faster than the other. And some part of the Nasdaq 100 are doing much better than the others inside this indicator. So today, due to the changes in the macroeconomic environment, the stock market performance is decoupled from the economic fundamentals. And another thing to see is that from the beginning of March until now, the transactions in the stock market has exceeded that of the period before the crisis, before the COVID-19 epidemic. Of course, this performance with the stock market has its role to play. For example, the financing quantity has grown so much. For May only, it has reached 60 billion. So the stock market has to some extent restored its capacity, but at the same time, we have also to recognize that the stock market is decoupled from the economic fundamentals. It's growing just because they have a special monetary policy. I think they are gambling against the Fed. The central bank has released such a policy. Do they have the courage to call it back? In the very beginning, it's a gambling among the market entities, and now it has become the gambling between the market and the Fed. I think it's a kind of kidnapping of the policies. We have to keep a close eye on the following up policies. We have to think about the future influences of those macroeconomic policies. Apart from the financial market, the stock market, and also the leveraging ratio, we also have to look at the fiscal policy. For the transitional fiscal policy, will it have a squeeze-out effect? And for the stimulus policies, will it be sustainable? Because we can never sustain a fiscal policy forever. And there are also deep-rooted causes. Today, when we are flooding the economy with extreme liquidity, it cannot help us to cope with the deep-rooted problems. For example, with zero interest rate or even negative interest rate, it's not a good thing to boost up the productivity of the enterprises. At the same time, we have to pay attention to the gap between the rich and poor populations while it continues to enlarge. And U.S. is the largest economy in the world, so we are looking at the policies of the U.S. The monetary policies from the U.S. will have a very huge external impact on the whole world. To conclude, I'd like to say one thing. In a wartime, bullets are very important. However, we have to use the bullets very carefully and in a smart way. We cannot shoot everywhere. In China, our macroeconomic policies are very proactive in the face of the epidemic. However, at the same time, we are also very prudent. We are coping with the epidemic with our macroeconomic policies, and we are balancing those short-term effects of the macroeconomic policies with its long-term impact. We have to cope with the epidemic for the moment. At the same time, we also have to lay a solid foundation for the future economic recovery and further growth of the financial sector. So across the whole world, I believe that we have to improve the coordination of our financial policies and also boost global collaboration in order to have a better settlement of this epidemic. Thank you, Mr. Tu, for your analysis. You have talked about the changes of the world after the outbreak of the epidemic. You have also talked about the importance of the macroeconomic policies, whether they are effective, whether they are targeted. We have to think about those issues. And he's also talking about whether the world economy is kidnapping the Fed. And for the future, there will be more and more deficit. This would represent 10% of the world GDP for the whole year. And there are also other problems of huge importance, like the inequalities and also external impact. Because we will listen to one speaker in our hall and one online. So I would like to give the floor to Professor Michael Spence. I'd like to give the floor to you. Just now, Mr. Tu has talked about an assumption. It seems like the whole world market has kidnapped the Fed. And they are using this extraordinary monetary policy to guarantee the liquidity on the market, to consolidate the investors' confidence. Maybe the reality is not as optimistic as we thought. Do you believe that the Fed is kidnapped by the world market? And what is your expectation for the prospect of the world economy? What will be the future economic growth model? Is it in a V shape, U shape, or other shapes? We are now in a time of uncertainties. You can hear me now? When I'm talking, there is the echoing sound. I can hear the echoes. Could you please make some adjustment to that, to the sound quality? Maybe it's due to the jet lag. Okay, it's better now. Those are very important subjects. So I'd like to offer some personal insights. Today we are in a time of uncertainties. Basically, I don't believe that the central Bank of China, the Fed of the US have been kidnapped, but still they are in difficulties. To some extent, we are shifting towards another direction. We have become more proactive to a monetary easing. It's also true in Europe. We have never seen that before, with so much debt, so that the government could put a cushion against the bad impact from the epidemic. Especially the government is delivering relief to the people living in poverty and in difficulty, and also those people that have lost their jobs. The current policies applied differ from those applied after the previous financial crisis, although they look similar at first glance. In the past, the goal of the QE was quite different. And now we also have to consider the fiscal policy, the public debt. In the least developed countries, they represent 40 to 50% of their GDP. Today, for the fiscal policy, we have to make more efforts to help the enterprises out and also to minimize the negative impact from the epidemic. And for the decoupling from the real economy, we do have some problems like that. The decoupling of the stock market from the real economy, and the discount rate is rising too. The liquidity would grow much higher than expected. The Nasdaq the economics in the post-epidemic era has accelerated the transformation of the economy. The major digital companies, digital platforms in China or in Western countries will have a bigger weight in the stock market and in the stock indicators. That may explain why we have witnessed a partly decoupling of the stock market from the real economy. But in general, no one could make a forecast about the future economic recovery. Different countries can have different models and different trajectories of recovery. I believe that in the future, we will not have a V-shaped recovery. Very interesting thing is that in Hangzhou, we have a program called the Following Up Program of the After Epidemic Economic Growth. They have followed the real-time statistics of 130 countries. Based on the statistics, they are observing the economic performance and the future expectations. I will not go into details, but still you can find that a lot of economies are shrinking, some even to an extent of 30%. And those countries are at the bottom level while coping with the COVID-19. For some countries, it may take a long period of time to get the economy recovered, some even longer period. Those are the conclusions that we could conclude from the statistics. Even though today we are lifting up the restriction measures, the lockdown measures, but still people are fearful about the frequent contact with others. Civil aviation would continue to be restrained for a long period of to come, especially those trans-border flights. The recovery will finally come for sure, but it will come at a late time. Because still people, they have fears to start immediately the contact with the other people. Another thing is that we have noticed a interesting phenomenon in China and in other Asian countries. They have taken prompt measures, so they have developed this work resumption very quickly. But for the US and in European countries, they have relatively sluggish moves. And there is evident economic shrinking, and there will be long-lasting impacts from the epidemic. For most economies, they will come to such a stage that the epidemic is controlled, and then the economy starts to pick up. For the developed countries, for developing countries such as India, Mexico, you can find some similarities among those countries. There is an obvious slowdown of the economy, and they are also suffering from the epidemic control. So they will stay at the bottom, and they will remain in this dangerous area. At the same time, they cannot successfully control the spread of the epidemic, and they cannot have an immediate recovery of the economy. In other developed economies and some Asian countries like China, the situation is totally different. Their situation is much better. For those developing countries in difficulties, they have a fragile health care system, and their economic strength is not sufficient. For some middle-income countries, if they don't collaborate with the other countries, at least they have to strengthen the collaboration in this aspect of epidemic control. They have to collaborate with the other countries so that they will prevent a possible crisis for mankind. Today, I'm hesitating between the optimistic and pessimist views. Some problems have been intensified. We could find a lot of fields for collaboration. For science and technology researches and medical development, we could continue to collaborate, and they are doing very well. They are not suffering from the epidemic. For financial sector, as is mentioned by several speakers before me, we have already carried out collaboration among the central banks and financial institutions. This is obvious that we have to continue with the international collaboration in a lot of areas, including the scientific researches and medical care. Here's the fragmentation of the collaboration, but still we could draw lessons from this epidemic and change our future direction. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your contribution. You have mentioned a lot of interesting topics. I hope that later we could have more time to enter into depth about the policies and the recoveries, and also China's role. And now I'd like to give the floor to Catherine McGuinness. Could you please talk about the impact of Brexit? After the Brexit, what is the impact on London to remain as an international financial center, and what could be the possible collaboration between London and Shanghai and between the two countries? Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to take the floor here. I would like to come to Shanghai in person, but still, video conference is also a good choice. Now we are talking about a global emergency event. And Brexit is not as global as the COVID-19 epidemic. Epidemic of COVID-19 has impacted our lives from many aspects. But for the Brexit negotiation is also going on. We hope that we could conclude the deal as soon as possible, and we are fully prepared in the financial sector, and we are fully prepared for the possible difficulties in the near future. Today, we are still confronting with some challenges, but we have the courage and the capacity to cope with that. London has its own strengths. Our legislative system, the ecosystem, and also we have our status as one of the most important capital center in the world. Over the past years, we have collaborated so much with China. For the transactions of RMB, in London, we have a huge amount of transactions, and also the Shanghai-London Connect is working very well, and deposit bill is also in operation now. We have issued this certificate so that it can be used for financing the global market. Of course, this epidemic would cast a heavy blow on the humankind and the world economy. We are all under challenges. In this case, collaboration is of great importance. Cooperation is important in itself. We are facing a lot of risks and uncertainties and difficulties. The epidemic would impact the whole humankind and also leave a lot of consequences. For me, I believe that the financial sector could play an important role. I believe that international collaboration is extremely important. It has a role to play for the recovery of the medical system and for the recovery of the world economy. The banking system and other financial institutions, as well as the international capital, will all play their role. They can help to prevent and control the epidemic. At the same time, we also have a high ratio of the debt. In the UK, we are worried about the work resumption and the recovery of the small and medium-sized enterprises. And how could we cope with this rising debt? Domestically, we have taken measures and policies to help those enterprises out. Apart from that, we are also looking at the world economic recovery. Just now, Michael has mentioned a very important point of view, the climate change. While boosting the economic recovery, climate change is also an important subject. A much wider governance of the economic and social environment should follow the rules already made internationally. In the UK, we have a plan called Build Back Better. It means that when we are developing the economy, we also have to keep a close eye on the other aspects of the society so that we can make some progress. The management of environment is put in the center of our economic development policy. We have to set up the standards for the management. And in this case, we have to build more bridges of connections instead of isolations among us. We have to join our hands so that we can tide over the difficulties together. But I could assure you that Brexit will not weaken the collaboration between China and the UK. We will continue to be a world financial center that can be a good reference and a good partner. Thank you, Catherine, for your contribution. I would like to say thank you to our foreign experts for keeping us optimistic. And now let's get back to our guests on the podium. And I will give the floor to Mr. Zhu. Thank you. Just now, our speakers have talked about the macroeconomic policies and other related issues against this background of epidemic. Before the crisis, the world economy has already run into some problems, and now this COVID-19 epidemic has stopped the world growth temporarily, and unilateralism and protectionism are growing once again. Because I myself am working in the New Development Bank, so I'm dealing with the business with the BRICS countries and other developing countries. So I would like to say something about the impact of the epidemic and the challenges brought by this epidemic to the developing countries and the emerging economies. According to the analysis of the World Bank, this year's developing economies and emerging markets would shrink by 2.5% in the GDP growth, and there is a decrease of 3.6% of the per capita income, and a huge amount of people would return to the poverty status. And according to the forecast of the World Bank, Brazil will have a minus 0.8% of economic growth. For Russia, it's minus 0.6%. India minus 3.2%, and South Africa minus 3.1%. So in general, it's all negative growth. And China has basically reached out of this epidemic. So China could have a relatively better performance for the economic growth. For the epidemic status, U.S. has the largest number of the patients. Number 2, second place is the Brazil, and South Africa has the largest number of the confirmed COVID-19 cases in Africa. For the BRICS countries, the 4 other countries than China have also adopted proactive macroeconomic policies. A lot of them are extraordinary fiscal and monetary policies. As is mentioned by Mr. Tu, those policies are to maintain the social stability and to avoid a possible economic collapse. Those are the hard efforts made by their governments. However, at the same time, we have to notice that for the emerging economies and the low-income countries, they have the economic structural uncertainties. So they may differ from the models of economic growth of the developed economies. For example, take India as an example. They are facing a lot of challenges. A lot of workers are working in informal sectors. They cannot benefit from the social security programs. This means once jobless, they cannot sustain their daily living. how could we give relief to these people? How could we get them back to their work positions? This is a big challenge to the government. And many other developing economies share the same concerns. For example, in China, we have this huge group of migrant workers. Because they are not fully covered by the social security scheme, so once jobless, it's very hard for them to keep up with their daily living. And another problem with the economy is they have a very simplified structure of the economy. Once there is the shutdown of the world economy, this means a really bad news for those economies, and they are under great shock. And the rising debt will also put them under risks in the future. Multilateral international organizations are adopting policies to help those developing countries. So is our new development bank. We have a facility of $10 billion to help the developing countries to support the daily life of the people, their medical care system, and we also have the emergency loans for the future economic recovery. We have lent to India $1 billion. I would like to add up one thing. Sorry to interrupt you. The new development bank has identified itself as a green partner, and just now Catherine has also talked about the environmental protection. So for the emergency funds, you will not add up with this limitation of the green criteria. So will this new facility reshape your orientation? Due to the time limit, could you please be short? For the Asian Investment Bank and New Development Bank, we are focusing in the investment of the infrastructure, so we would like to be green, be environmentally friendly. However, in this epidemic era, our emergency facility is used for the epidemic prevention and control, and for the future economic recovery, and also the relief to the SMEs, as well as the settlement of the global supply chain. But we will try our best to make them sustainable. Being green is still a direction to follow. And currently, the developing countries, they have received help from the IMF and from the World Bank, as well as other international institutions like ours. But there is still a gap between the supply and the demand. Due to the time limit, I would like to share with you two of my opinions. People are talking a lot about the world supply chain and the industrial chain. People are wondering the possible changes with those two chains. According to my personal analysis and observation, considering the security in this epidemic era, some economies are prioritizing their national security. So in the future, there may be a trend of localization of the international supply chain. Investment will follow the trade and transactions. So in the future, there will be three major zones. The first is the Canada, Mexico, and US. Second is the Asian countries, including China, Japan, RK, and other neighboring countries. And the third area is Europe. Without major crisis, those three supply areas can still be interconnected, but there will be some impact left from this epidemic. Another point is related with the points made by Mr. Tu and Mr. Spence, the sustainability of the debt. With this extraordinary, uncommon fiscal and monetary policies, many countries are adding up, increasing their debt on the basis of an already large accumulation of debt, especially for the emerging economies. We should not underestimate their debt volume. If we cannot have a very immediate economic recovery, then those countries will be facing a very huge pressure of the debt, and also there will be a readjustment of their credit ranking. For the emerging economies and the low-income countries after the epidemic, if they cannot settle the issue in a prompt measure, then maybe some countries will also run into a new round of debt crisis. Thank you so much for Mr. Zhu. To the time limit, we could not continue with this discussion with you. And now let's move to Mr. Fang Xinghai. I'd like to share with you some personal insights. First of all, we are celebrating the 12th anniversary of the Lujiazui Forum. I met a lot of old colleagues here. They have contributed so much to the successful organization of this forum. We could consider Lujiazui Forum as one of the most influential forums in this kind in the whole world. And here are my insights. First of all, about collaboration. After the epidemic, people are wondering what is the future about globalization and global cooperation. People say that finally we will see the end of the epidemic, and by then the world will be different. But different how? We have to make a distinction between the short-term phenomenon and the long-term phenomenon. If you have heard some speeches of some countries' leaders, you will be so worried that you would like to close the country up. However, we have to consider a lot more elements. After the outbreak of the epidemic, some countries have run into the shortage of the epidemic appliances. So they have decided that in the future, they will start to manufacture everything by themselves and get their manufacturing lines back. In order to have a sufficient supply of the medical equipment, we can have two options. First of all, you can produce everything by yourself. And second, you could make some stockage. Which manner is more cost effective? For example, if there's another country in the world that can produce those appliances and equipment at a lower cost, and you can make the importation and make some stockage, will it be a wiser option? Or instead you would like to produce everything by yourself? Personally, I believe this importation and stockage method is a better option. Secondly, for some international companies, they have suffered a lot because in some cases their supply chains are overseas, and once the destination country is locked down, then they cannot have the supply for the moment. First of all, I don't believe that we should retrieve all the manufacturing lines and supply chains back to the country, or move the supply chain from one country to another, because that may also lead to the gathering of the risks or a dropping efficiency of the work. In the layout of the industrial chain, we have to consider the efficiency and also the supply risks. We have to strike a balance among all the elements. We cannot say we will bring everything back and we will produce everything by ourselves, since now, after the epidemic, the internal logic of globalization and allocation of resources across the whole world still remain true. Due to the epidemic, there will be some short-term impacts, but they will disappear in the future. Today we are communicating with our friends in New York and in London through the video conferencing, and I have also discussed some issues with my foreign friends. Today we have a lot of means to get us connected with the others and have some online platforms for the communication. It's not necessary to get together every time. And today we have significantly reduced the cost of transportation. It's much cheaper to travel around the world, and telecommunication technology is developing so fast. Today we can have this video conferencing because we have made so much progress in the telecommunication technology. And this epidemic has even boosted the progress with the telecommunication sector. Today we have much fewer flights, but we have kept our advanced technologies in the civil aviation sector. After the epidemic, one day we will pick up all those traffic and transportation sector. All those fundamentals remain unchanged. So maybe after this epidemic, there will be another round, a second round of globalization, an even more intensified globalization. That could also be possible. Another thing to share with you, if we could admit the fact that the internal logic of globalization still remains true, then what should we do in China? China should provide new momentum and contributions for the new round of globalization. For a higher level of globalizations, all countries cannot propose new ideas. Personally, I believe that currently only the US, China, and European countries could have that capacity. Recently, the US may not have that capacity to promote a new round of globalization. Europe is more mobilized, but it's also very hard to have a consensus out of those countries. And China is a big country, we should shoulder our responsibility, and we have to play our role in promoting a new round of globalization. And a new round of globalization would be beneficial to China and also to the rest of the world. Today we are talking about building Shanghai into a world financial center. It's based on RMB currency. It's different from New York, it's different from London, and such a world financial center is based on renminbi currency. If we don't have a convertibility of the RMB or a very low level of convertibility of the RMB, then this international financial center would not be a center with huge global influence. So moving forward, we could seize the opportunity of Shanghai as a global financial center to promote the internationalization of the RMB currency and open the Chinese markets even wider, so that in the future the capital in Shanghai could serve the whole world. And in this case, RMB would be a currency widely used and worldly used. Then this would add up a new momentum for the next round of globalization. Capital use would be widened and the efficiency would be improved, and there will be a higher level of security in the financial sector. Today we only have the US. With only one major player, super player, it cannot guarantee the security of the whole market because we only do the transactions in the US dollars. Especially now you can see that they are flooding the economy with extreme liquidity, and since the majority of the transactions are based on the US currency, on the dollars, so they can use it as a tool to impose sanctions on China. If RMB could become an internationally used currency, then all the countries in the world could feel safer. The whole world economy and the financial sector could be safer. And China could also create a more favorable environment and safer environment for its development. So we would like to take this opportunity of building Shanghai into a global financial center to further promote the internationalization and improve the convertibility of the RMB. The third point of view I'd like to share with you all is actually already mentioned by Mr. Zhou and the other speakers about the concept shares. I believe that today some ego politicians from the US have some misunderstanding about China's development, or they have a personal consideration for their interest in the presidential election. They would like to exclude the Chinese companies. But still, I believe that it's not that easy for them to exclude those companies from China out of the stock, because most of the investors for those companies come from the US. If those Chinese enterprises are excluded, then it will be the US investors to suffer. From the U.S. side, some people say that it's hard for them to complete the whole examination and control of our audit. But I propose that we could sit down and find a way out together. First of all, we should have this willingness to figure out the solution. We should not take it as an excuse instead. And this morning, the chairman of the CSIC has also mentioned that there will be a lot of possible solutions. The listing of the concept shares of the Chinese companies will be a win-win solution for China, for the US. It can help the further development of the New York Exchange, and it can help the US investors. We hope that the US colleagues could sit down with us and figure out a solution for the existing problems. Thank you very much for Mr. Zhu. One of your point of views is that we could not only believe in the self-reliance to have this supply chain, and we also have to accelerate the building of Shanghai into international financial center, and we need more collaboration in the issue of the concept of shares of the Chinese companies. We don't have too much time left. We can take some minutes to have some wrap up, but very quickly, I would like to ask a question to Mr. Zhou. A specific question. Now, with the outbreak of the epidemic, digitalization has become more and more important for so many countries. Today, our conference is also based on digital technologies. In the future, the world will develop much faster on the basis of digital technologies. And Fed, in the first round of relief measures, has mentioned that the relief plans towards the individuals may be realized by the digital dollar. We have talked about this issue already in the past, a digital currency. Some people are also talking about the digital dollar and the Libra version 2.0, this connection between the digital dollar and the Libra. They could have a PPP mechanism to develop a digital dollar. And you can feel that impact on the Chinese currency. Just now, our speaker has also mentioned the internationalization of the Chinese currency. In our policy document, we have already mentioned the free flow of the currency across the border. So, Mr. Zhou, could you please share with us your proposals for the free exchange of the for the free exchange of the RMB? What could we do in the future? We cannot hear you, Mr. Zhou. So have you muted? Mr. Zhou, we cannot hear you. So maybe you have muted your microphone. So maybe you have to turn on your microphone. We can barely hear you, Mr. Zhou. So we have to wait a little bit to fix this technical problem. Due to some technical issues, we could not hear Mr. Zhou. So while waiting for Mr. Zhou to come back, we can wrap up. I will ask a question to Catherine. It's a very simple question. This epidemic, do you believe that it could leave a long-term scar on the world? How big could that scar be? And the second question, for the international collaboration in the financial sector, what is the most important thing? And first to Michael and then to Catherine. From a global point of view, we have to look at the economic problem and medical care problem. We have to be very resilient and collaborating one with another. We have to draw lessons from the past so that we can be smarter in the future. Just now you mentioned the digitalization. Today we have noticed a lot of changes, evolutions in the world. It is also true in the UK. I'm very delighted to see that in this post-epidemic era, digitalization has been promoted. And based on this technology, a lot of companies are able to continue with their operations. So we have to consolidate this momentum of growth. And one more thing, in the financial sector, the resilience has been built after the 2008 global financial crisis because we have a much more flexible financial sector, and we have developed such a relationship between the regulators and the financial markets. We have to make sure that today the capital is flowing in a responsible way. Of course, the epidemic would leave with us a scar, but it can become a future basis for our collaboration. We would consider more collaboration in the financial regulation. We have to bear in mind the environmental issue too. We cannot ignore that issue. We have to continue to pay attention to the sustainable development because we are facing the future. When we are making decisions globally and domestically, we have to bear in mind the importance of environmental issues. And in the globalization world, we have to build up more bridges instead of obstacles. And now let's get to Mr. Zhou. And now, can you hear me? Okay, we can hear you now. I think it's a very interesting topic, but it's not that closely connected with the topic of this panel discussion. So very briefly, Today, we can have this video conferencing based on the telecommunication technologies. The applied technology is telecommunication. It can help us to send the signals of video and the signals of the voice. This technology has come into being since long, and later we have the digitalization technology. Digitalization has brought to us a lot of advantages. And today we are building up the infrastructures for the digital technology, so more users could get connected simultaneously, and they can share these channels at the same time. So digitalization is helping the telecommunication and improving its quality and efficiency. A similar case is the digital payment. In the beginning, we have used the telecommunication technology to send and receive the information about the payment and transactions. Because in the beginning, all those signals are based on the data. The content we are transmitting from one place to another are based on the data and statistics. And later, because we have the digital technology, we have empowered the telecommunication-based payment. So it's not digitalization itself that is helping or supporting the payments or the video conferencing. It has actually enlarged the capacity of the telecommunication. Today, facing the epidemic, the digital currency and the digital payment, as well as other new concepts like the blockchain, LDT, are they an improved version of the traditional model, or they are a disruptive form? That is a topic of our discussion, and people are still taking time to figure it out, and we have to make a distinction between the two different point of views. And personally, I believe there are already several progress made. First of all, the retail payment has progressed so much. Especially today, we have the smartphones and a digital infrastructure in place. They are bringing to us much more possibilities. And transporter payment is also under analysis and development. They can help to improve the efficiency of our transactions. There are also other potentials waiting to be tapped in the future. But still, we have to make a distinction. Digitalization is a tool that can help us to improve the efficiency of the payments based on the existing technologies. Or we can use digitalization as a brand new way to disrupt the traditional ways of payment. We have to be very prudent in making a choice. Because the payment is a very important part of the total financial sector and activities. So we have to take care of this issue and consider the other elements such as the financial risks. So taking the opportunity, I'd like to clarify this topic. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Zhou. Actually, you have touched the deep-rooted problem. And now I'd like to turn to Michael Spence, Professor Spence. In your opinion, what will be the impact of the epidemic in the world economy and the finance sector? Could you please conclude a little bit?
抱歉，这个声音刚刚有点问题。
Sorry, I had a technical problem. In the short term, I believe that there will be a loss. For the distribution and allocation, it's under the heavy blow from the epidemic. Just now, I have also mentioned that it's no easy job to cope with an epidemic because the hardest hit countries and areas are the countries with the low income. And there's the rising nationalism and also the domestic battle for the interests. Looking at the long-term bigger picture, I'm rather optimistic because there are still a lot of people working together. They share the same point of view about the destiny of humankind in the future. They are working very hard, and also they understand the importance of collaboration. In the future, I believe that these people would prevail. However, currently, in the short term, we have derailed and we are not moving towards the correct direction. We have to find a way out. How could we build a better global system? Everyone's looking at this topic, but in order to solve the problem, we have to form the synergy from all countries and from international organizations. Thank you. Michael Spence, you're looking forward to the global cooperation. Could you please give us your expectation for the global collaboration? Okay, technical problem still. Let's get back to Mr. Zhu. In just in few sentences, could you please give us a response? What will be the long-lasting negative impact of the epidemic in the world economy, and what about the future development? As is mentioned by Mr. Tu and other speakers, we have to focus on the bigger picture. We should not abuse the policy measures and monetary measures. We still have to reserve some policy rooms for the future. Of course, this epidemic has cast a heavy blow on the world economy. But at the same time, we have to draw good lessons from this epidemic. I've heard two kinds of opinions. First of all, first kind of opinion is that people believe that we have to strengthen international collaboration. And the second point of view is quite to the opposite. People believe that we should depend on ourselves. I'm pro to the first opinion. We have to be more active in the global collaboration because it's a win-win solution for everyone. And finally, to Mr. Fang, talking about the international collaboration, the U.S. attitude is quite influential. As an outsider, we think that the U.S. is in a recession status with a lot of problems, and it's hard for the U.S. to make a shift in the short term. But still, when we look at the U.S., we have to focus on the fundamentals. Some changes may have only short-term impacts, but some others may be everlasting. This year, U.S. will have a presidential election, and there are a lot of discussions. Would you expect Joe Biden to be the new president? It doesn't matter. Maybe there will be a new structure, a new architecture from the U.S. that could be favorable to the global cooperation. So we hope that for 2021, after the epidemic, we could have further development. Not a black swan, but some good signs, some good surprises for 2021. Once again, I would like to say thank you to our speakers from abroad, Catherine, Michael, and also Mr. Zhou from Beijing. And also, I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you. That is all for our plenary